Kansas farmers' hopes for the future of hemp remain high, despite a rough start. How can the state help? Plus, a push in Topeka to provide more financial aid to aircraft workers laid off due to the Boeing 737 production shutdown. And the future of the abortion amendment to the Kansas Constitution comes down to 4 votes. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. On Friday morning, the Kansas House began its vote on whether or not to send an abortion amendment to the state constitution to you for an additional vote. That vote finally failed just an hour before we began recording this show. It failed by a vote of 80 to 43, falling 4 votes short of what they needed. All of this after a lengthy debate on Thursday, as we see here.
The final vote comes tomorrow, but so far supporters lack 4 votes in their efforts to regulate abortions. In today's vote, 80 representatives were in favor of the amendment. 3 Republicans sided with the Democrats in opposition of the bill. But Republicans need at least 84 votes in favor of the amendment. Those in support of the bill argue it would reinstate regulations on abortions that went away with the Kansas Supreme Court's decision on abortion last year.
That it really have to do with safety measures, clinic licensing, informed consent, parental consent, 24-hour waiting period.
However, opponents of the bill see it as a first step toward a complete ban on abortion, as well as denying rights to women.
If it passes, would strip a subset of Kansans of their constitutional rights, and that subset would be Kansans who can become pregnant.
If the issue passes, voters would decide the issue on the August ballot. At the Capitol, I'm Corinne Griffith.
And that August ballot really was the main point of contention with this amendment. Every Republican who voted against it cited that they believed it should be on the November ballot. Joining me on the desk this week to discuss this and more, we have Suzanne Tobias with the Wichita Eagle and Dr. Neil Allen, political scientist from Wichita State University. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As we talk about this amendment, I believe it was Representative Heineman who said, put it on the November ballot and I will guarantee I will vote for it, but I can't vote for it in August. That really became the sticking point in the House.
Well, that's a really important issue because the turnout for primary elections is much lower than the turnout for general elections. And so the electorate's going to be very different in August than it is in November. And so if this amendment would be on the ballot in August, then that would probably be an advantage to conservative Republicans, both in terms of passing the amendment and also in terms of winning primaries against moderate Republicans. So the stakes were broader than just the policy implications here, also involving who gets elected and who doesn't.
Well, and certainly an issue of how many people can vote, but also an issue of whether it was even needed. I know some folks have asked me, but wait a minute, don't we already also regulate other medical procedures? Do we really need further permission to regulate abortion procedures? And that really, I kind of was surprised, has not come up in the debate. It's been all of the kind of standard issues that we hear on most abortion debates that have come up.
Procedural issues like the ones you're talking about. What interested me today in the last story I read about it just prior to the vote was that Kansans for Life was saying they would not support Medicaid expansion if this doesn't pass. So I guess we'll see how that shakes out. But that is, I mean, that's just getting into just political gamesmanship, it seems like to me, and not really the substance of the actual amendment.
Well, as a political scientist, you know, the word political sometimes means different things for me than for others. It's not necessarily a dirty word. But also, though, you could say it's gamesmanship, but also it's communication. And so the job of elected officials is to communicate to us what it is they're for and how they're going to behave in office in the future, if you elect them. And so this is pretty strong communication by a good chunk of the Republicans, frankly almost all the Republicans in the Kansas legislature, about what their priorities are. And Democrats and a tiny number of other Republicans, I think the number is 4, who joined them in blocking it, they're communicating something different. And the voters are going to have a chance to talk about this with their legislators and then make a decision in August and November on the full partisan ballot. And so I think this is valuable. Now, I don't know if it's best to hold the vote open for 4 hours and hold
Get the popcorn out. And,
although apparently that's why I'm here, because the two legislators who are going to be sitting in this seat and this seat, but thankfully I wore my tie today, so I was ready.
bipartisan tie.
Yes, yes. Wichita State University takes no sides in partisan elections.
That's right.
But also this shows how difficult it is to be a legislator. I mean, these people have jobs and kids and things, and today they were sitting in chairs, having the same debate that they've been having their entire life, just a little bit more public.
But you're right that's a really good point about priorities, and I think that's what a lot of people, a lot of the legislation that's floated really early in a session. It's like, is this what we should be, is this the biggest priority for Kansans right now? We've got people out of jobs we'll talk about, and all sorts of things going on. And but we had someone on here a couple weeks ago who said, the other priority for the legislature is abortion. So I mean, people feel very strongly about that.
And I'm going to jump in there because you brought up priorities, and Senator Wagle, who was kind of leading the introduction of this and the push through, had said that was her top priority right now, was getting this push through. We had a discussion at the time that how much of that was about the Senate race for the U.S. Senate that was coming up, and her trying to perhaps get her name out there a little bit more as she goes up against Kobach and Roger Marshall.
To have a potential win going into that.
Well, that's right. And also, Senator Wagle's job is to try to put forward legislation and in some cases constitutional amendments that are supported by the majority of her caucus and also can fit the priorities of the state. And I think stopping abortion, limiting abortion is a public policy priority of lots of citizens in Kansas and lots of their legislators. Now, will this help Wagle, beat Chris Kobach in the primary? I mean, that's a hard thing to do because his name recognition is so much higher than hers is. But also, it's hard to be a legislative leader in any situation, partly because the voters in Kansas keep electing an inconsistent group of legislators that cannot collectively make a clear decision based upon the rules of our politics.
Well, lots of decisions they have ahead of them to make, and we're going to talk about a couple of those. 3 Wichita area representatives want the state to help out Spirit workers and other aviation workers laid off due to the Boeing 737 production shutdown. They introduced their plans this week. The Wichita Eagle reports 3 Kansas representatives want a change in state law that would expand access to unemployment benefits for Wichita area workers impacted by the Boeing production shutdown of the 737 MAX. They introduced House Bills 2565 and 2566 this week. 2565 would end the current mandatory 1-week waiting period before workers can apply for unemployment benefits. 2566 would lengthen how long workers would be eligible for those benefits from 16 weeks to 26 weeks. Spirit Aerosystems has already laid off 2,800 workers due to the shutdown and indicated more layoffs could be on the way. And subcontractors around the area have also begun laying off workers despite the current shortage of qualified personnel in Wichita. The lawmakers behind these bills say their main purpose is to keep those skilled aircraft workers in Kansas. Quote, "Out-of-state competitors have been in Wichita for weeks trying to poach our talented, skilled people," Jim Ward said. And this is something that I guess if you've been following the issue isn't that much of a surprise. We talked about this when we first started hearing word of major layoffs here, and lawmakers had said, we've done this before. This isn't new, and certainly we've seen that here in Wichita, where they've extended unemployment benefits before under extreme circumstances.
The downturn and the layoffs are certainly nothing new for Wichita. The circumstances under which these have happened are extremely unique. This indefinite sort of halt of the MAX, so that's different. But just today in Wichita, they announced some tuition-free programs at WSU Tech that they're going to offer tuition-free training for all laid-off workers. That is the kind of tangible stuff that people have been waiting for. And bills like this, I think, that is actually, we've heard that there's this fund, the unemployment fund is healthy and it's ready to go, but we haven't until just very recently this week seen those actual proposals. So that's good to see. I think that a lot of workers are are worried about what's going to happen in the next, those layoff notices went out last night to a lot of salaried employees at Spirit and elsewhere. So I think that these types of bills, extending the length that they can get unemployment, really streamlining the process to get it, that's what workers need.
Yeah. Well, and certainly if we're talking about trying to keep them here in Wichita, vital, because I've talked with workers who are like, yeah, I knew this was coming. I already had another job lined up. Their house is already on the market. They're out of town already. Yeah. Pretty much as soon as they got the notice.
Yeah, this poaching is interesting. I mean, I feel like Keith Lowing and his folks at the Workforce Center are like, stay away from our people. They're really, really focused on keeping those people here. But what do you do when you're laid off and you want a job with benefits?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to. Do you want to hang on, as long as you can and just find something to get you through? I mean, those people are making a lot of really hard decisions.
Yeah. And also what separates this particular situation from the recession of 2008 and 2009, when I wasn't here at the time, but it was lots of pain anywhere and everywhere in the country, was back then there were job losses here, but there were job losses everywhere.
Yeah.
And so the options were less for people, although back then you could go to live in a man camp in Williston, North Dakota and freeze.
You can now too.
Yeah, right. And but now we're in a situation where the economy is doing quite well. There's job shortages all over the country, but then because of particular decisions by Boeing and how it interacts with the air and physics and government regulation, then we have this localized, horrific kind of job loss. And so it is a very difficult situation, and this is what unemployment compensation funds are for, but also I'm sure there'll be some opposition to this because unemployment is going to keep happening to people in Wichita and Kansas for as long as there is employment, and these kind of funds are not, infinite.
Right.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Well, and so, as you looked at the announcements online on Facebook, especially as the stories were going out, there were a lot of folks saying, well, but I lost my job too just because I'm not an aviation worker, I don't qualify. There's a lot of that going on as well.
That's a good point. I mean, all the service workers and every other industry that's connected.
impacted.
I mean, when you have the largest employer of Wichita, it's going to have a trickle-down effect.
Exactly,
Sure.
yeah. And part of why I think there is so much effort being made from the city level to the state level to try and shore up the local economy.
And diversify, but we hear that every time. So.
Yeah. The question is are we ever going to actually do it?
We'll see, I guess.
All right. Well, diversifying sports teams, something that kind of
different diversity.
Yeah, ran into a little bit of a stumbling block, you might call it, at the State House this week. A bill requiring transgender students to play on sports teams based on their gender at birth is getting national headlines even before it's been introduced. This after Equality Kansas lambasted the proposal at the State House on Thursday. According to the Wichita Eagle, Equality Kansas released a draft version of the bill on Thursday that it says Representative Michael Capps has been circulating. That bill would ban transgender students from playing on school sports teams for the gender they identify as, requiring them to play as their gender at birth. Tom Witt of Equality Kansas said the bill would put a target on the children's backs. Quote, "The bills we're seeing now are targeted at kids," Witt said at a news conference Thursday. All across the country, the anti-LGBT bills are picking on little kids, and that's what we have here in this bill. Capps told the Eagle he did draft the bill, but disagrees with Witt's characterization of it. He says it's about protecting the rights of gender-conforming students. Quote, "A biological girl wants to be in a competitive sport with other biological girls," he told the Eagle. Freedom for All Americans, an LGBTQ rights group, says similar bills have been introduced in a dozen states this year and at the federal level. And of course, the sport question is not the only LGBTQ bill that's been introduced that group tracks, but just those was 12 states plus the federal level. Not including Kansas yet, because it hasn't been introduced here in Kansas. After all of the furor, does it feel like it's still going to be introduced, or is this dead before it hits the... I don't know. I suppose it's all up to Representative Capps and any other sponsors he might get on that bill. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, Representative Capps is in a very difficult position. He represents one of the more Republican districts in the state, at least in a suburban area, northeast of Wichita. He almost lost to a Democrat in the last election because of some stories about issues that he had with the foster care system. The Republican Party probably would have gotten him off the ballot if they had a mechanism to do so, but it's really hard when it's that late. He's going to get primary challenge, or maybe 2, maybe 3. Democrats are unlikely to be competitive in that district unless he's the nominee again. And so this looks like a play to try to show that he's a defender of things that his constituents care about. But also, I mean, the negative consequences of a bill like this are pretty massive. In particular, the NCAA does not look kindly these days on bills like this. And Kansas has a massive commitment to college sports. And this could jeopardize that the way it nearly did in North Carolina, the way it did in Indiana. And so this doesn't look like it's going anywhere.
It makes me wonder, though, if Capps is now a front man, essentially, for any type of controversial bill other Republicans might want to introduce. I mean, he is, he's persona non grata in the legislature right now. He's got, his own party, wants him to step down. He refuses to. He's like the perfect fall guy for any legislation you want to float. I think that that's a possibility with this. It's a possibility with, the other thing going on here are there are special interest groups and lobbies that have these insert state name here bills that you can introduce. The other one that Capps has suggested is the In God We Trust bill. So this could be part of that. It could be part of just, and then I think, again, we talk about priorities, I think that's the big argument here is this something, high school sports teams and who plays where, is that, a priority for the legislature? I don't know.
Well, and full transparency, Michael Capps was one of the representatives who was supposed to be here today. I was going to talk to him about this particular issue as well as the others. We set up our guests long before we know what the topics of the week are. It was just a coincidence of timing. And
then that vote went forever.
And then the vote went forever,
Right.
and Capps and John Carmichael, the other one, were not able to make it. But one thing that I wanted to ask him, and I don't know if you two have any thoughts on this, is how much his name coming up in the Wichita mayoral race and all of the furor about that smear ad campaign against Brandon Whipple. Remember, there was a connection that the Eagle made between his name, his location, his business addresses, and the
video.
Source of that video. How much that may or may not have played into trying to get these conservative bills going.
Well, he may think he's on. I don't know. I wish he were here too. I really do, because I have a lot of questions as well. But
we all do.
I think he. I don't know. Maybe he thinks he's a short timer and he wants to push as much through as he can. I don't know. Is that unfair?
Well, let's just take a look at the public communication. We saw there that he made public communication that had a particularly strong view of what children want to do and and the idea of safety of children. And to bring it into a broader context, there's a lot of discussion about this issue, particularly involving like world records and things in women's sports and eligibility guidelines and things like that. But also just as a parent of 2 children in Wichita Public Schools, I lean against putting more rules on schools as to how they can organize their activities, because just organizing, for example, a basketball game, pickup, and parent-teacher conferences at a school on the same day
is already a nightmare.
It requires basically every single person who works at the school to work late that day. And if you are then saying more and more about what you can do in terms of sporting events and what is a sporting event and who can participate.
And who's going to check these birth certificates and how this is executed at that level.
And also, my daughter goes to a school where there are multiple kids in many classes, all with the same first name and sometimes the same last name. It's just, I think a lot of people don't understand how difficult it is to actually work at a school under all the rules that schools have no control over.
Well, something else that's difficult to work with and people have no control over is farming and the weather.
Yes, that's for sure.
Kansas farmers are looking to the future of growing hemp in Kansas, but for some, it's been a pretty rough start. Cake's Annette Lawless talks to farmers about the challenges.
It's been quite the learning experience. We've had a lot of highs and a lot of lows. Just Mother Nature can be cruel.
Farmers like Melissa Nelson say last May's heavy rainfall made for a tough start. The wettest month in state history, destroying a lot of crops, including the first harvest for industrial hemp research. Dozens of farmers gathered in Wichita Tuesday, looking at the data, best practices, and where the industry is heading.
We just really believe in the hemp industry and the products that can come from it. So, you may have the rough times, but that's okay because you're moving the industry forward.
I think the future is bright, and I think that there will be some learning curves, of course.
Andrea Harms is hoping to maximize on those possibilities, just releasing her first bottles of CBD oil this past week and looking to other products to help sustain her farm and Kansas agriculture. Her family is developing more items like lotions to help those with health problems.
It's almost better than ingesting it into your stomach, and so putting the cream on, it surprised me, but my in-laws loved it. And so I was like, they were really struggling with some pain in a few spots, and so the fact that it helped them to me was, a good thing, because not everybody wants to ingest it. There's a little bit of that fear there.
And one thing they've seen once they pass this is every year they've had more and more people signing up for these licenses to do what at this point is an experiment. Last year was hard. The weather was really bad. I talked to a couple of hemp farmers that were like, yeah, we had to replant twice. But they're also having to figure out how to process it and what the products are, how to get it to the market. And a lot of that also is coming back to the legislature because of rules that they're setting.
I don't have any background in hemp farming, but also I'm the product of a 150-year-long Indiana farm family. But we don't have hemp. My dad does corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, hay. And one point that I think is important here is that farming is an industry of self-reliance, but also it's an industry of government support. And so much of American agriculture is supported by the Agriculture Department. In some ways, the most important person in any rural area, in some urban areas, is the Agriculture Extension Agent that's run through land-grant universities. And what we're seeing in Kansas now is the kind of growing pains of an industry that the government needs to first allow, which hasn't been true until fairly recently, and also support with connections to knowledge, because farmers are like any other worker. They need knowledge, they need time. And also, farmers do not have control of the weather. The Chinese think they might have some idea on how to exceed the clouds, but they just do that mainly to get the rain out before the big festivals. But it's a difficult kind of thing for people who farm. But also, whenever there's many crops that have other places all around the world that are competing with our farmers, it might be a good opportunity for folks. But agriculture is not some kind of business where you can get in at the ground floor and then immediately make money the next year when the weather's against you.
Yeah, well, and especially in this case when we're talking about hemp, this is a long-term project, I think, before we start seeing the point of folks making profits off of it, from what it sounds like. All right, well, one other thing that has raised some eyebrows and quite a bit of chatter in the Wichita area, it could soon be illegal for grocery stores to give you single-use plastic bags, or they may come with a special tax. The City Council voted this last week to form a task force to study how Wichita can reduce or get rid of plastic bags. Cake's Lacey Williams shows us why.
Harriet Hickman braved the cold Wednesday afternoon to recycle plastic bags she's been collecting.
Well, I saved my grocery bags and some other plastic bags to recycle.
On a busy day at Dillon's, hundreds or thousands of plastic bags are filled with groceries. But that could become a thing of the past. On Tuesday, Wichita City Council members voted yes to a new task force to consider how Wichita could reduce or get rid of single-use plastic bags. The committee will consider two options, banning the bags or creating a new tax on the bag.
I am looking forward to starting this discussion right away.
Jane Burns is on that task force. She first brought up her concerns about the bags to City Council last September.
And they're all over. They're in our trees, our neighborhoods, our waters and streams, and in our oceans.
People who support this ban say their biggest concern is plastic bags going straight from the store to a field or the river and possibly harming wildlife. Hundreds of cities across the U.S. have already banned the plastic bags in the last few years. Local business representatives are also on the task force, helping to decide the future of plastic in Wichita. Hickman is encouraging citizens to do what they can to use reusable bags or to recycle.
I'm in the habit now, and it's a good thing to do for our planet. So,
Lacey Williams, Cake News on your side.
Certainly raising some eyebrows and a lot of chatter.
Yes, on social media, it's been incredible, the sort of debate that's already going on. I can see, this is one of those issues I really do see both sides. You know, I've got reusable bags in my trunk. I try to use them whenever I can, but you do think, you know, is this essentially a regressive tax? Is it another, like, you know, is it going to, yes, it's easy enough for me to have, you know, reusable bags in the trunk of my car that I own. It's a little bit harder maybe for lower income people who, you know, show up to the store and don't have those and have a baby on one hip and a toddler on their side, and they're trying to struggle to get stuff, and they have to end up paying, you know, 10 cents a bag or whatever. So I can see the argument against it.
Well, and I mean, just personally, I would lean toward the idea of a tax.
Really?
Instead of a ban, because also it lets the market work, and also and you know, a tax on bags and possibly and then no tax on recycled or, you know, materials, because also you know, there needs to be a market for recycling, and some of the difficulty in this country involving recycling is that Americans are unwilling to sort out their recycling. And so, but I can understand, though, you know, a lot of the concerns here. I mean, just you know, Monday morning, my trash blew over, and thankfully I was out there right after it blew over, or there would have been plastic bags in a creek next door to where we live. And so, but you know, this is not, you know, new to us. Lots of other places have done this, and will adapt no matter what happens.
That's for sure. And you know, Kansans travel, and they go to places like California and Portland and other places where this is happening, and see that it can work. And I think it could work. It's a huge cultural shift when you grow up, thinking you can just get a bag wherever, and just switching that, you know, switching your mind to have.
I think for me that's probably the biggest issue, because you know, I've talked before. My husband's from Germany, and we go back and visit my in-laws. And anytime you go to the store there, you have to have your own bag, or you pay to purchase one. So I have those reusable bags that, you know, they fit in their own little pouch that sits in my purse at all times. But how many times do I remember to actually use it?
Exactly. Unless you get to a store that doesn't offer them, and then you know.
Exactly. Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens there. Thank you so much, Suzanne and Neil, for joining us this week. It's been an interesting discussion. I hope you have enjoyed it as well. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's topics or future ideas for shows. Just email us at kansasweek@kpts.org. For now, have a great week.